Hi there, I'm Christy Wilhelmi from Gardenerd. I find myself having to describe the difference between sweet potatoes and potatoes to new gardeners, so I figured let's do a video about that. They are different. They grow during different times of the year, they have a different growth habit and behavior, and they're not even in the same plant family, so let's talk about it. First up, time of year. If you live in a warm winter climate, you can grow potatoes in the ground or in containers year-round. There are generally two seasons where you'll grow in the spring through, somewhere around March-ish through the midsummer. I planted some potatoes in summer and just harvested them right now. And then, of course, fall-grown potatoes are great because you're not competing with anything else in the Solanaceae family, which is the family that potatoes belong to. The Solanaceae family includes things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and tomatillos. So your garden may be crowded during the summer with plants in that family, but in the fall, potatoes are the only one. Sweet potatoes, on the other hand, are in the morning glory family, and as such, they are a bit of a rambler. They can be grown starting in May and are harvested in November before your first frost. Get them out of the ground before the ground freezes over, and then cure them and store them for winter. So that's timing. Let's talk about growth behavior. Potatoes will grow where you plant them. They don't ramble. They can be grown in containers, as I mentioned. The foliage looks like this. Very, very much like other members of the Solanaceae family. Now, as you can see, potatoes are also susceptible to blight, so that is why you want to rotate them to areas where you haven't grown any members of the Solanaceae family every season that you plan to grow them. Potatoes form along the roots. They grow out, they are a tuber, and they grow out along the roots. And when they're ready, the foliage will start to die back, like this guy did, and you dig down, and usually the math is somewhere around 10 to 1. You plant one, you get 10. It's pretty cool. Sweet potatoes, on the other hand, have a long growth habit. They vine like this, and this part of the plant is actually edible. It helps with a couple of different it helps regulate a couple of different things in the body, so you can eat that if you want to. Whereas potatoes, you don't want to eat that foliage. All right, now the thing you need to know about growth habit for sweet potatoes is if you live in a warm winter climate, they're not going to give you the bed back. They are considered a perennial. I planted this bed with sweet potato slips, which is how they're grown, from little vines that were rooted off of the potato itself, the sweet potato itself. And you plant those. I planted sweet potato slips in this bed 6 years ago. I've never planted sweet potatoes since. And every year, even though I think I've dug up every last one, they come back. So I've been harvesting at least 2 buckets full of sweet potatoes every year for the last 6 years after planting once. So it's a perennial in warm winter climates. In cold winter climates, they'll die back, and you generally have to replant new slips each year. For those of you who want to grow sweet potatoes and potatoes in the same place, you can. It just gets a little messy. As you can see here, there are potatoes I grew in this bed last year, and I obviously missed some, so they've poked back up, and they're right next to the sweet potato foliage. They're growing at different levels in the soil, so it's not that big a deal, but I'm going to try and get them all this time so I don't have both growing in the same place. When it comes time to harvesting potatoes and sweet potatoes, there's a little bit of a difference there too. When you harvest potatoes, you pull them out of the ground. I never wash them off. I let them dry out of direct sunlight because potatoes will develop a toxin. They'll turn green, and that green is a toxin that you don't want to consume. So potatoes want to cure and dry down out of direct sunlight. So put them on newspaper or a screen in a dark room or a garage, and then you're good. Sweet potatoes, on the other hand, want to be put out in the sun to dry down for a few days. Usually 3 days out of a rainy environment will toughen the skins enough to bring them indoors and then cure them. When it's time to harvest potatoes and sweet potatoes, The same tools are good for both. One, your hands. I like to harvest with my hands. Digging potatoes out is like digging for buried treasure. You get in there, especially if you have children, and just scratch away at the soil, and you will do less harm to the potatoes if you do harvest it that way. If not, a digging fork. So rather than a shovel, which can splice potatoes and sweet potatoes in half, use a digging fork and lift them up. So stick it in the ground, tip it back, and that will lift the potatoes and sweet potatoes up. For sweet potatoes, in order for them to develop their sweetness, they need to be cured, and that means putting them in a humid environment for about 10 days in a single layer. For some people, like us, we don't have a humid room, so we can put them in the oven with just the pilot light on and a pan of water underneath them, and that will help bring them to that point where they are cured. As someone who has never done this before, I can tell you they still taste fine as you eat them throughout the year. You just might be missing some of that signature sweetness that you'll find with the store-bought varieties. So now that you know the difference between potatoes and sweet potatoes, you can grow them to your heart's content. If you like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can find out when our next video comes online. And of course, there's more information like this and so much more in Gardening for Geeks, so get your copy today and it will help you through this season's gardening. Also, consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support all the free stuff that we do here at Gardenerd. Happy gardening!